All right, folks, how you doing? Welcome to Edinburgh, the original Jerusalem part 3. So this is the third and final part of the overall presentation. So sit back, relax, and enjoy, and I'll reconnect once again when Jed arrives.
I want to put my earphones in.
Well, that's all right. How you doing?
Aye, good man, good. Pretty tired today. Like I've got to say, like I've had a hard graft. Like Edinburgh can be a nightmare to work in. Just because of all the restrictions now, getting on the roads. Like
Oh, yeah.
I was doing a job at Slateford Road, and they've put
Yeah.
this big cycle link going right along the. Slateford's a big, huge road, and they've put a cycle lane right along with all these lot of bollards and double red lines, and so see you try to do any work near the stairs.
Mhm.
Uh, you have to park up one of the other streets, like round the corner. And oh man, I've done like according to my watch, I've done like
Mhm.
9.5 miles, like walking the day.
Jeez. Yeah.
So
Well,
I had to go for a wee nap when I got home, like so
yeah.
I could do tonight's like podcast because I probably couldn't have. Like when I came home, I was like a zombie. You know, I'm 42 this year. Get me?
Mhm.
I shouldn't be
Yeah.
doing this shit.
Well, I could have done with that today because I'm turning out a bit of a fat ass myself. I had an interesting experience today. I was getting the bus into Edinburgh, 7:45 in the morning, and this guy came in and sat next to me, and I thought it was actually you. This was in Broxburn. I thought, no, this can't be Jed. Jed lives where he lives. He doesn't live in Broxburn. But I swear this guy was a double of you. And I was like, I was kind of looking at him, and I was kind of expecting him, half expecting him to turn and say, "All right," but that never happened. But I
No,
was like,
I drive into work, man. Like I drive, I've got a car, I drive in, man. But
yeah,
occasionally I'll take the bus because Edinburgh can be a nightmare to take the car into. So
mm,
sometimes you're better off just getting the bus. Like
yeah,
I think it was a weekend there. Me and the wee man went up to St Giles, and we went to actually St Mary's as well at the St James's Centre. All
yeah.
these saints, St James, St Giles, St John. Anyway, we went up there, but instead of going up there with my car, because it's a
Mhm,
bloody nightmare for parking and for anything with our car, we just parked at Stockton and we jumped
mhm.
the tram. And that tram, man, is so fast. But it was like, when we got up there, it was like 15 minutes from Stockton up to like St Andrew's Square. That's quick. Getting
Oh
in a
yeah,
car, that's usually 20 minutes, getting 25,
yep.
half an hour sometimes, depending on roadworks and stuff like that. But it's like 10, 15 minutes, St Andrew's Square, bang. So we were up there, we done our wee thing. So going back, oh my God, man, the Scotland England rugby game was on. The Hibs were
Oh right,
playing
aye.
as well. Oh my God, the city was packed. And see the trams, it was like something in Bangladesh, man. It was like, and nobody was even like stopping. There was no right, like there was no like person standing there going, right, enough people in the tram. This is enough. Just
Mm,
people just kept crushing on it, and I was like, oh my God, this is getting unbelievable. Like I was like
aye.
breathing down someone's neck, and someone's like breathing down my butt crack because I'm like 6'3".
Jeez. Okay. Well, it's older than me. I'm only 5'11". But yeah, I was trying to get out of Edinburgh today, and we were delayed by the Mound. You know, like the Royal Scottish Academy, that junction there. We
hmm
went through 3 or 4 sets of green lights, and the tram didn't freaking move. I was like, "What the fuck?" I thought it was a breakdown or something. I was like,
hmm
"The
it's
hell's
when it
going
hits
on?"
the Haymarket, but like if you're
Aye,
coming back out of the town, it's when
aye,
you hit the Haymarket, it starts picking up speed. You're on the tram, and it's taking a while to get actually through Princes Street and all that. But once you hit the Haymarket and it starts going towards Murrayfield, it starts to like put the acceleration on. That's when the speed picks up. You're like, Jesus, we're going 60 mile an hour here or something.
aye.
That's what
So
it
there was
feels like.
a big rugby game on the day. Okay, that explains it. I was wondering why the hell we were waiting like 4 green lights through the freaking Royal Scottish Academy. I was like, what the fuck? You know, I couldn't make any sense of it at the time, but that makes sense, perfect sense now. Um,
But I mean, the wee man had a wee sort of pilgrimage up to like a Catholic church that's kind of in the middle of the town, and
aye.
St Giles, which was a Catholic church, but obviously that's where it started the Reformation with John Knox and all that kind of stuff happened.
Yeah,
So it was
that's
like
where
giving
he's
him a taste
based.
of both worlds. Can I try to give him a taste of both worlds? Um,
Yeah. John Knox is the only person who's still buried there. That's Parliament Square behind St Giles. That used to be a graveyard before
mhm,
Greyfriars, just for
mhm.
the general audience, for folk who are watching. They moved all the bodies out in the 1500s except for one person, John Knox. He's still buried there. He's the only person who is. Every other person was moved to Greyfriars because I think he put it in his last will and testament. He wanted to be buried next to his church. But just a quick kind of side note about St. Mary's Cathedral. There's actually two of them in Edinburgh, not one. There's the Episcopalian Cathedral on the one side, and there's the Catholic Cathedral on the other side, and they're both called St. Mary's. So depending on your faith, if you're Episcopalian or if you're Roman Catholic, you're looking at complete opposite sides of Edinburgh. Because one of them is very close to the Haymarket, that's the Episcopalian Church, which is still used, by the way, by apprentice stonemasons to hone their craft to this day. It's such a magnificent building. It was also largely founded by the Walker family. And there's the Roman Catholic Church, which is by one of the two theatre districts in Edinburgh, because there's actually really two of them. There's the one up Lothian Road, and there's also the one at kind of York Place, and they're on opposite sides. So anyway, just thought I'd mention that.
So I've not really had time to look at the slides either. I sort of had a queef. What's a queef?
Jeez.
I had a queef. Had a quick look.
Edit that out. I'll edit that out.
I had a quick sort of skim. I was like, all right, I can see where he's going with this one. That's I kind of get the drift. But we'll let you begin.
All right. So this is part 3 of Edinburgh, the original Jerusalem. Usual disclaimer for research purposes and teaching as scholarship and so forth and so on. If you've seen my videos by now, you'll get the drift. So I've got the usual map. Unfortunately, there's no way, because I kind of fiddled around with this for like half an hour to an hour to see if I could make it more intelligible and decipherable. Quite honestly, you can't. You just need to kind of zoom in and kind of hope for the best. But I think you can kind of get it online, like off Google, or just buy the books themselves. There are various ways. In fact, not one but two authors have actually included this map in their books. One of them was Michael Desarian, and the other one was David Allen Ritchie with We the Scythians, as well as Commons Beaumont himself. So this map is taken somewhat seriously by alternative historians. So you can get this map not only in The Great Deception itself, possibly Britannica World History, I can't remember if it's in that book, but also you can get it in the Irish Origins of Civilization by Michael Desarian, which I think was in volume 1, if I'm not mistaken, and also We the Scythians by David Allen Ritchie includes this map as well, which is slightly updated. So there you go. There is some traction with this theory with alternative historians, you know, and well, I guess we'll argue that point as we go through the slides.
Well, it's not like we're breakthrough.
Yeah,
kind of alternative historians of this idea that these places that are in the Bible could be places here. That this is not an old idea. It's been going around for a while. We're just the new generation that's talking about it nowadays. Really.
Yeah, we're just we're playing catch up in some ways, I guess.
But
so
Geoffrey of Monmouth, Geoffrey of Monmouth, he was on it years ago. He was probably a pioneer. A lot of people sort of base their stuff off of him. Like a lot of these people we mentioned, like it usually goes back to Monmouth.
Yeah, a great historian. Absolutely. He's definitely an invaluable source when you get into all this stuff. I think even Alan Wilson refers to him. Remember we were mentioning him before?
Everybody does. Everybody does. It all goes back to like him.
And there's this theory that Arthur's seat, by the way, spoiler, the Mount of Olives, according to Beaumont, was Arthur's seat. There's this whole thing that Arthur's seat was the mountain of the archers or something like that. And I'm thinking to myself, well, this is the biggest load of pish I've ever heard in my life. What the fuck's it got to do with archers? If it's called Arthur's seat, it's obviously named after King Arthur. It's Arthur. When you break it down, R meaning like king or chief, and Thor meaning Thor, Chief Thor or King Thor or God Thor. This whole thing that it's the mountain of the archers. Well, that's one theory anyway. I think personally that there's not much to that at all. Well, we'll just get into it. So the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives, as we gather from the scriptures, this is according to Beaumont, overlooked and dominated Jerusalem and was regarded as a sacred height. As its name portends, it was planted with olive groves and also had oaks and myrtle trees. On a flank of it lay the king's garden belonging to the former house of the Forest of Lebanon, built by Solomon, the later famous Garden of Gethsemane. Now, if you're an evangelical Christian, you got to be paying very close attention to this. King Arthur's Seat, 822 feet, dominates Edinburgh from the east, as did the Mount of Olives. Its lower heights, ringed with former linkets and terraces, yield evidence of the time when the olive and the vine could flourish here as in other parts of Britain. Now, before we go any further, this is very dependent on you having read The Riddle of the Earth and The Mysterious Comet, where he gets into all his theories about the climate of the North and the climate of the world. If you haven't read either of those books, The Riddle of the Earth or The Mysterious Comet, you're kind of scratching your head at this point. I'm thinking, what the fuck's he talking about? But anyway, so the olive
Well,
was. Sorry,
alright.
go ahead.
No, I'll let you finish, and then maybe I'll put my threepence
Okay.
worth.
So again, this is kind of Beaumont's ego kind of poking through, assuming that you've read every single one of his works up till now, and you're kind of following him every step of the way, rather than actually explaining what he means. But anyway, the olive was traditionally first cultivated by the Hyperboreans and taken by Hercules to Greece. Again, no evidence for that. Buried in the soil, bronze swords and celts have been found, which indicate the great antiquity of this outstanding height. One Jewish coin was mentioned by Sir Daniel Wilson in his Prehistoric Annals of Scotland, bearing the effigy of a man in a turban and with the inscription in Hebrew, Solomon ben Isaac. Near Salisbury Crags, 550 feet above sea, is evidence of a past tremendous physical appulsion causing a great fracture, with Samson's ribs suggestive of the god Hercules, the hero Samson, whose mission at the time of the flood was to throw down huge rocks and stones from above at the behest of the gods, where the bare basaltic columns dip downward to the lower end. Again, this last section is highly contingent on you having read Britain, the Key to World History, and The Riddle of Prehistoric Britain to understand what the fuck he's even talking about. But anyway, go ahead.
But I was just thinking the last part, like the way that they perceive like deities shaping the landscape, again by throwing pieces of rock here. And well, I was looking at the biggest lake. I didn't realize it, but the biggest freshwater lake in the UK is in Ireland. It's called Lough Neagh or something like that. It's a big giant square. If you look at Ireland, you look at up at the north, there's a big giant squarey water, and it's huge. It's a huge lake. But apparently, one of the giants you had a giant in Scotland and a giant in Ireland. Apparently, one of the giants scooped. This is how the lake was created. That he was scooped a handful to throw over, and that ended up being the Isle of Man. That scoop of land that he threw, that landed in the sea,
Really?
ended up being the Isle of Man. It's one of the old folk tales. How that lake was formed. The other story about how that lake was formed was a guy was on a horse. He got gifted a great horse, and he was told that the horse couldn't rest or something bad would happen. Like you couldn't let the horse rest. It had to keep going to the destination. But apparently this horse stopped to urinate, and then a great spring sprung out. So the rider of the horse like built a village around the spring and capped it. And one night he forgot to leave cap it, and it flooded, and it killed his family, it killed him, and it created that lake. So that's the other story for the lake. Crazy.
This is presumably in Northern Ireland you're talking about.
Well, that's actually 90% of it is in Northern Ireland, and the Republic Island actually have 10% of it because it goes just over the border. But it's a huge lake. It's a massive lake. I've never really thought about it, and I've never really looked at it. I've never really studied it. Totally overlooked it. There's loads of little stories like around that lake. When Bowman's talking about the lynchets and the terraces, like you know me, like I'm not just a guy that sits and reads this stuff. I go to these places. Actually, like I read something, I'm like, right, I'm going there tomorrow. There's a castle here. Well, I'm going there tomorrow. Well, we'll see if there's that ancient stone engraved in the wall, or if this is this, or whatever. I actually go to the places. That's the thing about me and my research, man. I actually go firsthand and look at the places, because a lot of people can sit and just pull shit out of the ark, and they can sit and just make stuff up. The best kind of research is actually going there and looking for your own eyes. Even having a wee scratch, a wee dig, and a wee snoop maybe
Yep.
lift a couple of stones. Again, that's what I do. Again, when I go to sites, I'm sort of snooping around, trying to look for any little clue that maybe might spark my sort of studying again, because it's hard to keep into this research. Again, you need little things to keep you sort of like inspired, and going to these places definitely inspires you. But what I was going to say about the terraces is that I went up Arthur's after reading about these terraces. I was like, Mount Olives, terraces, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. Right. So I went up there, took my drone up there. And do you know what? There's ancient terraces running all the way around the Arthur's Seat. And then a conclusion, because I looked more into it, I read into these. And when I read into them, these were terraces. These were places where things were being grown up on the hills. Partly Iron Age, and because apparently the climate back in ancient times around the bottom of Arthur's Seat, where the locks, it was just marshland. You couldn't grow anything. It was just swamp, marsh, sogginess. So these hills, like Arthur's Seat, were like, they weren't perfect conditions for growing, but they could grow stuff on these hills. As the water obviously dried and the temperatures changed and like the climate got better, they could move down the hills and start like agriculture on flatland. But it was up on the hills, and they've done a lot. And I've recorded a lot of these places, these old terraces that get totally overlooked. You should see the ones at Roscoe. They're so they're like step pyramids. They're like step. Oh my god! When you're looking at, when you see the sun, especially when the sun's on them and the shadows, as the shadows cast, you can see the steps. Kind of like steps, like the old ancient terraces you see in China, and like. When you look into it, it was like it sort of paints a picture of Scotland being a very wet area and a lot wetter, and so it's possible that after the Great Flood, the waters never retreated immediately, and it's possible it took a while for the waters to retreat gradually, and people were living in these hills and cultivating the land on these hills, which must have been difficult because, like they say, it's like basalt, and you only get about that much soil before it's like solid rock. You know what I mean? Like when you've got when you go outside and you dig a stick or a pole into the ground, you could usually get quite deep. But on Arthur's Seat, you get about sometimes that. And that's why you don't have trees. And they just can't root up on Arthur's Seat properly. But if you cultivated it properly and built the soil up on top of the hills and built them up and then cultivate them into terraces, you could grow. And those terraces we see now are thousands of years old, so they've probably worn right down. They were probably built up with soil and much more, and they've eroded and worn over time. So they probably would have cultivated not trees, but maybe something close to a medium-sized tree.
Growable. Yeah.
Aye.
Well, there's quite a few things to unpack from that. First of all, in the back half of the Mars, Atlantis, and the Hollow Earth presentations, Ike was talking about exactly this, but he wasn't talking about it in Scotland. He was talking about places much further afield, like India, like the Himalayan mountains, like South America, Central America, places like that. He wasn't really looking at home. He was looking much further abroad, but it was describing exactly that, growing crops in the highland areas due to a great catastrophe and a great flood, where you can kind of converge Ike and Beaumont in a way, though they certainly have many, many differences. The second thing I would say is the area just below Arthur's Seat and the Salisbury Crags is called the Doomby Dykes. Now, that comes from two things. Doomby comes from the school which was established, the first ever school for the education of deaf children in the 18th century. It was called the Doomby Dykes. Doomby coming from the word dumb, but dykes comes from this. It comes from farmland, because before they had the school, the special school, the first school established anywhere in the world, like I say, especially for the education of children who are deaf. Before that, that was recognized as a farmland area. And dykes referring to exactly what you're talking about, cultivation and growth. And they have like the dike areas up, and dikes as in growing dikes for kind of like crops and farmlands up into the Arthur's Seat and Holyrood Park area and the Salisbury Crags. So Doomby Dykes is a combination of two different things which have been kind of converged. The third thing I would say is, if you are actually a Commons Beaumont fanboy and you're following all of his works all the way through, as I have said before, The Great Deception is meant as a summary to everything that came before it. So this is highly contingent, what you're reading here, upon you having read everything that Beaumont has written before. And if you have, this makes perfect sense. But if you haven't, you're like, what? You know, and it just completely goes over your head.
Missing context. Like,
yeah, but this was meant as a summary when he was in his 80s, half blind and dying. So yeah, he could have, done a better job of it, arguably. But then again, when you're half blind and dying, how good a job can you really do?
there's a statue on Princess Street
Mhm.
with a guy with a turban. Who's that again?
Alan Ramsey.
Is that Alan Ramsey? Yeah, I knew it was like
Mhm.
he was just dressed in that attire, but it's a strange attire to have. I thought the Hopton guy as well,
Yeah.
outside the bank, in his full Roman regalia or Greek
Oh yeah,
regalia.
the Roman Bank of Scotland headquarters on St Andrews Square. Yeah,
I
yeah.
was
I
working
know
close
exactly
to
what you
there,
mean.
so I took a photo of him. Need that
And
photo.
again, as Beaumont always does, he's mixing in the Abrahamic world, Judaism, essentially, the Old Testament, with the classical world, the kind of Greco-Roman world. And he's just doing it without a second thought. He's just mixing them in, as if they're the same thing with no apprehension at all. He's talking about, on the one hand, he's talking about Solomon ben Isaac, obviously a reference to biblical characters, Abrahamic characters, not just Judaism, Islam as well, Christianity. And then he's talking in the next sentence about Samson and Hercules. And Samson was a biblical figure, Hercules was a classical figure. But this is Beaumont. He just thinks they're kind of the same thing and just mixed in and has no reservations about that at all. Just the same, according to him. Or not, if not the same, just very, very similar. But I think Beaumont's perspective is we've gone wrong by thinking they're different, when really they're the same thing. It seems to be his line of thought right the way through. If you think back to all the presentations we've covered with Comments Beaumont, that seems to be his through line all the way through. The classical and the Abrahamic worlds, you think they're separate, but they're not. It seems to be something that he's very determined about.
Yeah.
But at least he's left a reference there, the prehistoric annals of Scotland. So we'll move on to the next one. Unless there's anything else that you want to mention.
I was just going to say, I think there was maybe a typo there. When he was going on about the olive was traditionally first cultivated by the Hyperboreans, by Hercules to Greece, buried in the soil, bronze swords, and Celts
I know.
have been found.
Yeah, what does he
Is,
mean by that?
does he mean
Yeah.
like the physical bodies of Celts,
Or Celt armor?
or it's just Celts itself, like a broad term, like for I don't know what he's talking about there, Celtic jewellery or
I don't know.
swords
It
and
could mean
belts, maybe
Bronze Age.
belts, maybe it was a typo.
But yeah, the whole idea of the Hyperboreans and taken by Hercules. Again, if you're going to say stuff like that, prove it, back it up, have a reference
Well,
point according to the source that says it.
there's other accounts, and you need to look into the Irish accounts, but there's accounts all the first migrations to Ireland and them failing, dying of plagues and dying again. There was only one man and 50 women who went crazy, and again all these different stories. But there was one about one going back to Greece. If is it Nemed or something like? Is it Nemed? I think he was the start of the Firbolg.
That sounds familiar,
Race.
actually,
But
when you mentioned it.
but there's actually more, like if you wanted to use an example, like the crossover between Greece and Ireland and Scotland, he could have used that, and that comes straight out of the Irish like mythos stories kind of thing. Instead,
Yeah.
it's like the Hyperboreans and taken to it's like Hercules to Greece.
Again, go to Unslaved and go to what Michael Tazarian says about the Hyperborean world and all that. Very eye-opening. If you get the chance to go onto that podcast, he really uncovers it very, very well. Sorry, just plugging.
Well, they reckon the whole name of Hibernia comes from Hyboria, the Iberia, Hyboria, and they try and connect it. And maybe
Also,
before the Great Floods, maybe it was a bigger area.
Also, the Forest of Lebanon, I think that's like a direct or maybe even an indirect reference to the Gilgamesh epic, which was thought to be the kind of precursor to a lot of biblical myths like the Garden of Eden and stuff like that. And I've read the Gilgamesh epic years ago. I can't really remember much about it, but the Forest of Lebanon is like a specific reference to that. And also built by Solomon and the famous Garden of Gethsemane. And he's switching in literally 3 words from the Old Testament to the New Testament. Because the Garden of Gethsemane, evangelical Christians, devout Christians will know exactly what that's reference to. in the story of the Gospels and Jesus Christ before his crucifixion. Like, what was the night before he was crucified? He's gathered his disciples around in the garden and said basically his farewells. So Beaumont is it's like mastermind on cocaine, like subject, and you've just got to keep up. It's just dropping too much on the audience in such a compressed amount of time, because you're reading through this. Is okay, Force of Lebanon. Okay, so that's Gilgamesh, built by Solomon. That's Old Testament. Garden of Gethsemane. That's New Testament. King Arthur's Seat. That's Geoffrey of Monmouth and British legends. That's 4 things within not even a sentence. And then Edinburgh. That's 5 things.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it just drops all this on you, like an anvil.
That's why we're still sitting here after maybe 20 minutes on the first slide.
I know.
Again, because
right, next slide.
there's so many things he throws in there and so many talking points. Oh my God, because he throws one thing after the other, like an excited little boy, like, I'll just give you all at once. So they try to break down each point.
Okay, so
man, you made this slide tiny. The font is so small. That's unreal.
Well, I'm trying to get it all in.
Jesus Christ, man.
Sorry. Do you want me to read this one?
You can read it if you want, actually.
And you can do the next 2 after this, I guess. All right, so King Arthur's Seat. So this remarkable so-called geological fault, by the presence of basaltic columns, must relate to the event to that dramatic period of the Great Catastrophe, as described by the prophet Zechariah, who was in Jerusalem at the time, and describes the miraculous escape the city had on that momentous occasion, when the Mount of Olives was thus afflicted in these words, quote, "Then shall the Lord go forth, and his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west, and there shall be a great valley, and half of the mountain shall remove towards the north, and half of it towards the south." Zechariah 14:3-4, and Arthur's Seat in every way compares with the Mount of Olives, from whose height once a year, after the destruction of their city by Hadrian, which I've covered before in the Syrian Antioch and Lincoln, it covers this, the Jews were permitted to gaze on the ruins of their holy city. So again, there's a lot to unpack there.
So we're just since we're on that last, since we're on the last sort of thing, what was he saying there? Sorry, Hadrian. Hadrian. Yeah. So did he give permission for the Jews once a year to climb this hill to look down at their city?
He did. You can go once a year and look at it, but you can never occupy it again. So but they've had a loophole to that by converting to Christianity.
So we know Hadrian was in Britain, because that's in the whole Hadrian's Wall. So when was this? Before he was in Britain? After he was in Britain?
Yeah, you guys read the book?
The flap. I read the back flap. It's on the pictures.
Well, it's okay. It's exactly the same as in the script.
Cool.
You guys all read the script, right?
I covered it before.
Or was it?
I covered it before one of the previous presentations. Syrian Antioch and Lincoln kind of covered it a bit. But Hadrian operated out of York. Eboracum was his headquarters. And it was through that city that the Roman armies moved north into Scotland.
York was the staging point for every invasion of my country.
So where did they have time to be over in the Middle East doing all this with the?
Well, that's what Beaumont's
with the Jews every year.
Well, that's what Beaumont's exactly getting at in the Syrian Antioch and Lincoln presentations. He strongly makes the point and really hammers on this point and emphasizes it, that these, Roman officers are not going back and forth between the Mediterranean and Northern Europe, like 2 or 3 times a year, like they're just flying on EasyJet, or whatever, Ryanair. It takes a long time to get from one end to the Roman Empire to another end. So they would have to have been in Britain. He actually identifies the Assyrian rebellion under Boadicea or Boudica with the Jewish rebellion. He's saying that the Britons under, Caractacus and under Boudica were allies with the Jews who were fighting the Romans at the same time. You have to read it several times, but this is the argument that he makes, that the Essenian Boudica rebellion, the Caractacus rebellion, and the Jewish rebellion were all interconnected, and they all
I
happened
know.
in
Well,
the
if
north.
if you follow the other studies, that apparently the Exodus and these tribes, they came through Europe and possibly integrated with tribes in Britain and stuff like that. Who knows? Again, who knows? There might be that element in there.
And also the timeline when you try to go through those slides is very confusing as well. Like, he throws the dates in, but you need separate chapters for these things, not everything all into one chapter. It's very confusing, to be
I
honest.
find it hard to think of Jews as being a race in general.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, like when we use this term Jews, I find it hard. I feel a cringe every time I say it, because I think, and it's one of my, it's like, I think it's ridiculous to say that, like, Brazilians are a race, the people,
Yeah.
or again, Australians is a race, because it's like they're no race. Again, we've already had this conversation. So when
Yeah.
it comes to the Jews, I always have this battle in my mind, and I feel that all Jews are just exported Europeans that have mixed with other people in their environments. But at the end of the day, that's where they came from, and that's the main root.
Well,
And they were probably they're probably been put in the Middle East out of their own free will. They're probably taken there to the Middle East as slaves, kind of a bunch of a good, probably they said probably millions of Europeans got taken over to the Middle East and kind of as slaves. That's what modern media doesn't like to emphasize, or because it's all about the black slaves and all this, but people forget there was slavery is the oldest. They say prostitution is the oldest job in history, but the slave master was probably working for the prostitute, and she was probably working for him. Anyway,
there's several things I would say to that. When we get into Ignatius Donnelly with Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, I think that clarifies a lot of this. Barry Dunford as well somewhat explains the Roman-Brittonic connection. L.A. Waddell offers a lot to do with the identity of the Phoenicians, because I think the title was something like The Phoenician Origins of the Scots, Britons, and Anglo-Saxons. It might be slightly the other way around. But you have to go into all of it. What I would say is hold that thought, because we will address it in the future. It's not something that can be addressed quickly or easily.
Like I said, I think it's a lot of Europeans got taken into captivity over that part of the world. I think they create their own little things, kept to their own little groups, and now and again mixed with some of the outlier populations, but in general kept to their own. And after 1,000 years, and they've got their own ethnic identity. But it doesn't mean they're a race separate from the Europeans, really. You know what I mean?
I would say focus on the connections between the Hebrews and the Phoenicians. I would say focus on that. That's where you're going to get your answers, I would suggest.
That's what I think. Well, that's what I think. And I think a lot of these Celtic peoples were taken to the Middle East. And that's why you've got a lot of red, and that's why you've got a lot of, and that's why a lot of Jewish people look kind of got ginger hair, or it's hard to tell, like, a Scotsman and a Jew, like their phenotypes, the so-called Jew. That's what I'm saying. The reason why the Scots and the Jews look alike, because they're European. They're just both European men, white men. They've probably got similar haplogroups.
It's not something that's easy to unpack in just one presentation. You need loads of different sources and loads of different.
It's all about migration, and it's one of the biggest things, I think, kind of blurs all this, is by trying to separate these people as a separate race.
Yeah, that's where the confusion comes in, because I tend to find that things are more similar, if not the same, than you would imagine.
So just as you were making the connection earlier with the British tribe, Boudica, and the Jews somehow allying together. Well, no, I didn't think so. I think they're just the same people. Just some of them got taken away over to the Middle East. Then when they came home, eventually they came back. They came back as like European royalty almost. And this is where I think where all these Europeans, because when they started conquering certain lands, coming back, maybe escaped the Middle East, and all these Jews, and there's the Exodus story right there. The Exodus story is almost a story about Europeans being taken into slavery and escaping it, and then spreading throughout the world, and then becoming to dominate it in a way.
Yeah, well, there's different authors. Conor McDowell is another one. Michael Tazarian in the Irish Origins of Civilization goes into all this. He's even got a chapter. I'm going off memory here, so I might be slightly off, but I think his first or second volume, I'm pretty sure it's the first volume. I think. I might be wrong. But there was one of them. There was like a chapter and there was an appendix dedicated to Commons Beaumont. But looking at what he says as well, he's quite a valuable author for this stuff. But again, it's not easy to unpack. It's going to take a long time to really get into the roots of this. You're going to have to go through Conor McDowell, Ignatius Donnelly, Ellie Waddell.
Like I said, but it all stems back again. Like
it's not quick or easy.
You try and find where they got their research from.
Yeah,
and like I said, it all kind of stems back to the old Irish annals, the old Geoffrey of Monmouth. You need to look at the original sources that they were kind of basing their stuff on and make up your own mind. Because they threw in out, they sort of mixed up their own theories along with all that stuff. So it's good to go back to the original stuff where they based their theories from.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but what you were saying earlier, Anna Wilkes, Ireland, the Chaldees, that was another one.
Aye, I read that book. I read that book on my channel. Aye,
that's another one that talks about all these connections. Yeah, it's a difficult one because this is such a blurry subject, and what doesn't help is we're going back a long time. We're going back thousands of years, and the further back in time you go, the more confusing it gets. So it's not an easy subject to solve. But what do you think about what he's saying here? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say Arthur Seat isn't interesting. It is cleft in two. Again, you can see
it is completely.
Like he's not really showing you a good picture there. Well, you haven't shown us a good picture here, but like you can actually see it's like two bumps. It's like two bumps. There's like a cleft in the middle, and there's like a chunk taken out the middle, and it sort of goes down. You can see in that. It's almost like a ridge, it flows right up to that gap. It is an interesting hill, and it's amazing how little is up there.
I've never been sold that Arthur Seat was a volcano, to be honest. You Google search any volcano in the world, it doesn't look like Arthur Seat.
It's a plug. It's the remnants of a volcano.
Volcanic plug.
The volcanic plug, and then the rest of it is eroded away, and what's left is that hill. And at one point, it would have been level, nearly level, and you've got the core. It's like a cork, a solid basalt cork, and then the surrounding soil wears away over time, and then you're just left with this sort of tower.
So it's not really a volcano; it's a volcanic plug. But then there's three of them in Edinburgh. It's not just that. There's
all over the place, even Bass Rock. See, even Bass Rock. That's and all these islands that you see out in the Firth, the Firth and Forth. They're the exact same. They're all volcanic plugs.
Well, there's loads of them all over Scotland in general, but in Edinburgh you've got Castle Hill, which is where the castle is. There's also Carlton Hill, and then you've got Arthur's Seat. So none of them really are volcanoes. They're volcanic plugs, more like.
They're ancient volcanoes, mate. It goes fucking. It's way back.
Well, that ties into the riddle of the earth. What Beaumont was saying there. If you read that, he makes sense of this, or as close as Beaumont ever comes to making sense of anything. But I think he just gets overexcited and he just gets a bit carried away. He's talking about the revision of British history and doesn't really know how to properly kind of put it together, really. Like I say, he's just like skipping. The first two, though, Britain, the Key to World History and the Riddle of Prehistoric Britain, I'd say are better written, but they're still pretty jumbled. Like, you do have to read them a fair few times before you can kind of make sense of them. And even then, I'd recommend taking notes.
What was the great catastrophe as described by the prophet Zechariah? What was that?
Okay, that's what he was talking about in Britain, the Key to World History, which you've covered before. Like, you remember the whole section, the maneuvers of Moses and Odin being the same thing, and the invasion of Edinburgh and the invasion of the West.
But what was the great catastrophe? Was it a meteor?
It was a comet. It was twin comets. Hitting Jerusalem or Edinburgh, if you're going along with Beaumont here, and almost destroying the city, or like the remnant of a comet or something like that. I always kind of thought that the top of Arthur's Seat doesn't look like a volcano or even a volcanic plug, really. It looks more like a meteorite hit. Because look at the shape of the Salisbury Crags. It's like something's hit and it's going shaped like that, as in like a direct result of that cause and effect. And look at what he's saying. The Lord shall go forth before Jerusalem on the east, the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof, as in it will be hit by something towards the east and towards the west. So it's going to split in two like that. And you've got the valley right in the middle. Half of the mountain shall move towards the north. In other words, there's going to be an impact. Half it will move, which is kind of the hill that you see at the top. Half towards the south, which is, the top of Arthur's Seat and the peak. So it's kind of like the valley, and then it's kind of cleft in two like that. So you've got kind of like the valley in the middle, and then you've got like this divide. And that does follow the shape of what Zechariah is talking about, or at least it seems to me.
Yep.
And he's talking about the Mount of Olives, and you were saying earlier on about the dikes and the farming land, the farming area, the Mount of Olives, the farming on the mountain.
Yep, it doesn't give you, like I say, in this image, you can't really see the terracing. If you want to see the terracing, go to my channel, man. See is Edinburgh, Jerusalem. It's one of my, it's quite well viewed, but I get my drone and just with you can see it. So, and I've actually done another couple of videos about these terraces because it feels like I'm the only person talking about them. Because if we were doing this type of agriculture thousands of years ago, we are ahead of the game. Like the Romans, their agricultural tools were behind us when they arrived. Holy shit! And the Brits farming and their plows and stuff are much better. Again, they're more. There was a better design.
I chose the image that you see on the right there to emphasize what Zechariah was saying in the biblical passage. Not so much about the terraces, but what he's saying about the valley in the middle, the north and the south being cleft in two, and this kind of gap.
But even then, you can hardly see it, man.
Okay.
Like that's it's not the best image to sort of see, but either sort of about the terracing or because you've got the grassland in the background, so it's hard to see, and you need to screw your eyes to see it. But if people just research Arthur's Seat, you'll see this sort of divide, these two hills. It's almost like it's got two tops. It's like the lion's head, and then it goes down, and you've got the hump at the back, like it's the lion's rear end. Yep.
Well, that's what David Allen Ritchie talks about in We the Scythians. If you look at Arthur's Seat from the east, it looks like a lion. We'll get to him in the future.
Why do you have to reference him to say that it looked like a lion? Like, I got told it looked like a lion from my fucking granny when I was like 10-year-old.
No, my point was that
he didn't
in that
reference
book,
it. He mentioned it's a lion. Oh, my granny mentioned it was a lion when I was like 10. But it's funny because I couldn't even see, because for the west end of Edinburgh, you can't really see. It looks like a lion. You have to be on the other side, the Craig and Tinney side, to see it looking like a lion.
I was just trying to plug the author, really.
I plugged them about 5 times, mate, already.
All right, okay.
Jesus Christ.
All right, we'll move on to the next one then. Solomon's own house. Can you read that okay, or shall I?
I think I can. Right,
okay.
13. Solomon's own house. King Solomon, after completing his temple, erected his own house or palace near the Mount of Olives. It was by no means solely a royal residence, but here he administered the law and held court for the hearing of causes and pleas, where he became so greatly renowned for his wisdom. It had 2 quadrangular pillars and a court of prodigious size, wherein the king, seated on a throne of ivory, delivered judgment. It was called, perhaps colloquially, the House of the Forest of Lebanon, because it was built of oaks and cedars from that renowned area. It was Solomon's own house. 1 Kings 7:1. The Jewish Targum places it near the city, and its gardens lay alongside the Mount of Olives and were watered by the brook Gihon. The site occupied by Holyrood House may be considered in relation to Solomon's own house for its position, just outside the old Edinburgh, and yet facing its main entrances, looking towards the temple and royal castle, speaks an ancient claim, as Sir Walter Scott realizes, but knew not what. The tradition regarding Holyrood was that Saint David, of whom nothing tangible exists, and who may well have been the king near Arthur's Seat, he was attacked by a huge white stag and by some. Have I missed a line here? In King David, when Christian saints replaced pagan gods and princes. That's what we were speaking about before. Like he seems to get mixed up with who who King David is and who Saint David is. And I think he's just starting to think that Saint David
he's
is
not
King
talking.
David.
He's not talking about the Welsh St. David, if that clarifies things. He's talking about King
No,
David.
he's talking about like the Scottish one.
Yeah.
But he's kind of like, is this a saint or is it a king?
Same thing.
It's kind of
Same
it seems to be the same. Like because in Scotland, I've never really heard anything to do with Saint David.
I know, because he wasn't officially canonized by the Roman Church. That's why.
Right. Anyway, the tradition regarding Holyrood was that Saint David, of whom nothing tangible exists, and who may well have been King David when Christian saints replaced pagan god and princes, Edinburgh's patron saint, erecting an abbey on this site because near Arthur's seat he was attacked by a huge white stag. By some miraculous means, a fragment of the Holyrood was placed in his hand, seeing which the beast turned and fled. This bears all the marks of a medieval pious legend, but behind it lies the tradition of an early edifice where the royal palace of Holyrood now stands. It is seen, moreover, that the site of the present house fits completely into the remainder of the old Jerusalem and its environs, adjacent originally to the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yep. Now, first of all, I would say he's made a big mistake there. If you know your Edinburgh history, King David is not the patron saint of Edinburgh. Saint Giles is. So you think you would know that. Also, he's completely misspelt medieval. But maybe that's just kind of niggling things. The Brook Gahan referenced that the last time. That is a real kind of stream in Holyrood Park. Let's see, Walter Scott. Interesting that his name comes up. His name also comes up, by the way, in When Scotland Was Jewish. But it's also worth having a look at the Scott Monument on Princes Street with all these figures and figurines, and it has the gargoyles coming out of it, rather like Scottish castles and palaces and things like that, and prominent buildings. Walter Scott would be an interesting case study, I'll tell you. But that's in the future. Interesting how he's so keen to refer to King David as Saint David, because most people would not make that connection. If you're referring to Saint David, most people would think the Welsh Saint David.
Yeah.
So he could have been clearer there. Just refer to him as king, because most people do not know him as a saint. And they certainly don't know him as Edinburgh's patron saint, because he isn't. And when he's talking about
he does keep repeating that though.
Yeah.
Like in the last video as well, like he seemed to mention that a couple of times and sort of played with the idea that, is it a saint? Is it that? No, just get out of your head and just keep to the facts here. He was a king. King David, right? Fucking shut up.
And also the whole thing about the story of the white stag or the white hart, because that's the name of the pub in the Grass Market.
Yeah.
This is slightly off. That wasn't the version of the story I heard. Maybe there's another version I've not heard. But he's kind of messed us up a bit, because that is not the story. At least not the one that I know of, or maybe you know of.
A cross appeared above the stag's head.
That's the next slide.
And it's funny how that's a Jägermeister badge as well. If anyone drinks Jägermeister, it's a stag with a cross above its head. That's what was meant to have happened in the story that I read. And it's almost like the cross that Constantine seen in the sky as well. Yep. You can almost connect it to...
What was that battle that he won when he saw the cross in the sky? The Battle of Melville Bridge or something like that?
I'm not sure.
Immediately was struck in my head as well. Constantine. Yeah, that is exactly. Yep, I know exactly, because his army was outnumbered and he needed to inspire his men, so he came up with this story, and they ended up winning the battle. Yeah, the whole thing about the Holyrood, not even mentioning Saint Margaret at all, or Queen Margaret. You can interchangeably call Queen Margaret Saint Margaret, but you can't really do it with David. That's the thing. St. Margaret's Chapel, or Queen Margaret's Chapel, is the oldest building in Edinburgh Castle. People still get married in there, and if you serve in the armed forces, you can get a discount if you get married in there.
And what does he mean by a fragment of the Holyrood? Is this a piece of the tree, or is this a piece of the cross of Christ, or is it?
Yeah, exactly that.
What is the Holyrood?
Yeah. Queen Margaret.
The next. Rood's a word for red.
Yeah, so holy blood then.
Holy red.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the next slide and I'll explain exactly what that is in reference to. The Holyrood. Queen Margaret, when she married King Malcolm III Canmore, was said to have possessed a piece of the true cross, which might have come later on when they wanted to canonize her and all the rest. There's the image of Queen Margaret there on the left-hand side, presumably in her own chapel, dressed in the blue and white, which is the colours of both Scotland and Israel. And you got like the cross above her head, and she was of the Khazarian, Hungarian blood lineage, which I talked about in the first and second waves of Jewish
and
families coming into Scotland.
Malcolm cucked it, and she enforced her Catholicism all over Scotland. And we had a Celtic Christianity in Scotland, man. And she actually went out her way to extinct that fucking religion, man. She's fucking
Get into that in the future.
Oh,
remember that email I sent you about the religions of Scotland and all that?
She was a witch. She was a witch, and Malcolm was a cuck.
Well,
they sold out Scotland, David Beckham and fucking Posh over there.
Well, I'll tell you something, Jed, but we will get into that in the future through when Scotland was Jewish. I'll talk all about all this stuff.
When Scotland were cucks, I'm going to write a book.
Well, if you want to call it that, that's fair enough. But that is covered in the future somewhat. And when Scotland was Jewish, it talks about all this, the Judaic influence over the Celtic Church and all the rest of it. But anyway, that's in the future. On the right-hand side, you've got exactly what you're talking about, the myth of the... So Beaumont's screwed this up in a number of ways. He's talking about David possessed the cross or something. What was it he said? Oh, he's talking with his shit.
It was miraculously put in his hand or some shit, and the deer crapped itself.
It's not happened. The story goes that the White Stag, the White Hart, that's the name of the pub in the Grassmarket, oldest pub in Edinburgh, stood over the king after knocking him off his horse, and it was about to attack him, and he saw the miraculous sign of the cross between the antlers. And he became a very pious man after that, because he went hunting on a Sunday, which are definitely not meant to do back then. And after that, he became very devoted to the church, or the more plausible explanation was his mother, henpecked him into pushing her version of it, which is probably more likely. And then on the bottom right, you've got the Canongate, which was a separate town from Edinburgh until 1865, I think, from the middle of the 12th century, and the motto is Sic iter ad astra in Latin, thus you shall reach the stars. And the Canongate has a separate insignia and motto from the upper half of the Royal Mile, medieval Edinburgh. It's the stag with the cross. So that must have been really important to have emphasised that the Canongate has its own motto and its own symbol separate from Edinburgh, which still, by the way, exists. They never got rid of it, even when it became part of Edinburgh. Notice the colour in the background is red, as in blood, right? The colour red symbolises blood or bloodline. Very interesting. Yeah, I don't really know how to further read into it, but I think that symbol is kind of telling in a way. I don't quite know how to decode it, but I know it's significant, because they wouldn't have kept it there and emphasised its separation from the rest of Edinburgh if it wasn't important, I would suggest. Anyway, any thoughts on that?
What I find interesting as well, if you look at some of the Jewish heraldry, it does seem to coincide with Scottish heraldry. I bet you there's a badge out there probably within the Jewish heraldic symbols of a stag or something, or a deer or something similar, with maybe a cross beside it. And holy shit, you start realizing there's connections between these royal families' heraldry and the Jewish symbolism that they used. But yeah, next slide.
Well, the next slide is more pictures, and they always say that pictures tell 1,000 words. Let's hope so. So on the top left, there's Holyrood Palace, and you got the Abbey in the background. The Abbey predates the palace by quite a ways. The Abbey goes back to the 12th century, the palace to about the early 16th century.
And if you want to see the Abbey, you can go to my channel, because I've been to the Abbey and had a wee wander.
Yeah. And remember a couple of slides back, it's talking about quadrangles or something like that. Or was it? It was, I think, towards the beginning. Two quadrangle pillars and a court of prodigious size.
It's obviously square.
Left. Yeah,
square.
Exactly. And arguably that ties into Kabbalism and geometry and all the rest of it, and that sort of thing. You got the two quadrangle pillars on both sides, exactly as Beaumont's describing it, or maybe just worded that way to fit around how Holyrood Palace actually looks these days. Take your pick, really. And on the right, you've got the Garden of Gethsemane, and there's Jesus walking in a garden. Now, this is from a painting, and this is where I say art is very important. Not just
that ain't
photography.
Jesus, man. That's a woman, man. That's not Jesus walking in a garden. That's a woman, just a random fucking woman.
Recollections may vary.
That's a prostitute.
Uh,
For Leaf.
it's not. Anyway,
He's
the image on
got
the
way up
right.
the Fishwife's Causeway just to get there.
We'll get to the Fishwife's Causeway later on. That's a later slide. Now, the painting there on the right-hand side, I would say that looks like Arthur's Seat. It really does. On Holyrood Park in general. If you've been into that general area, that could easily be Holyrood Park. And it's supposed to be the Garden of Gethsemane. So maybe, this is maybe stretching it a bit, tinfoil hat time. Maybe whoever painted this image was kind of onto it a little bit, because that looks exactly like Holyrood Park, that image there on the right. And this is supposed to be, Jesus reflecting before the crucifixion, all the rest of it, just clearing his head, essentially, dressed in the blue and the white again, the colours of Scotland and Israel.
Was Jesus pregnant?
It's because it's a windy day. That's my interpretation. But it does look a bit like Holyrood Park, wouldn't you say?
There's not enough in the image for me to say either way. All I can see there is sort of barren landscape with some trees and a couple of hills. Like the colouring, I've got a sort of Scottishy feel with the colour.
All right, that's what I mean.
The colour, but that's about it.
All right, so the Valley of Hinnom and Golgotha. So 14, the Valley of Hinnom and Golgotha is another most important feature of Jerusalem to all Christians. The Valley of Hinnom, which led to the city of that name, passing by Golgotha, lay west of Jerusalem and had a bad reputation, for in the valley stood a high place, a Hivite altar, where Solomon had erected altars to the deities Astarte, Chemosh, and Milcom. Doesn't that sound an awful lot like Malcolm, by the way? Milcom.
Oh, aye, Malcolm.
Phonetically.
Malcolm, that's aye.
Yep. 2 Kings 23:13. So Josiah had thrown them down and defiled them. Very pivotal incident in the Old Testament. Quote, and he defiled Topeth, which is in the valley of Hinnom, that no man might make his son or daughter to pass through the fire unto Moloch. 2 Kings 23:10. Not very far distant were buried the corpses of the great army that was besieging Jerusalem at the moment when the Almighty destroyed 185,000 men of the Assyrian army, comprising those called Gog and Magog, by a mighty blast at a fraction of time, as described by Isaiah. I'll cover that in the future with Odin's thunder. I will address this in the future. But you'll have to be patient until I get around to that. Anyway, the area was appropriately called the Valley of Slaughter. Jeremiah says, quote, the days come that this place shall no more be called Tophet or the Valley of the Sons of Hinnom, but the Valley of Slaughter. Jeremiah 19:6. Ezekiel describes this shambles in some detail of the stench occasioned by the rotting corpses. It states that anyone passing who saw a hand or foot protruding was to put up a mark so that the gravediggers might inter it. He said that they should call it, quote, the Valley of the Multitude of Gog, Ezekiel 39:11. This fits in completely with the Great Catastrophe, whereby the territory in question obtained the name of Lanach, gale, lightning, which name is still borne by the adjoining region of Lanarkshire, where coal is mined in quantities. In the past, this area was called Damnia, or the Damned. So he's not quite as all over the place as he usually is with this. That's pretty cogent, actually, for Beaumont. It's not jumping all over the place quite as much here. Still the Old Testament references, but that harkens back to Britain, the Key to World History, which I've covered in the past. The whole idea that Jerusalem, just to give you kind of the brief summary, the idea was that Jerusalem, or Edinburgh, was besieged by this mighty army, which was like something like 300,000 strong, that came out of the east. It was like this huge confederation of eastern nations, everything from Germany to India, and it was led by this leader, Odin or Moses, same person according to Beaumont, controversially, but that was his opinion, not mine, not ours. That's what he says. And they were on the verge of taking the city when there was this great blast, the great blast of Isaiah, I think he says here, which was the comet that we were talking about earlier on, Arthur's Seat, up at the top. So this miracle happened, which destroyed the army that was besieging Jerusalem, destroyed 185,000, so half or over half of the army, if memory serves, and the rest just kind of fled, and that saved Jerusalem from falling, as described in the Bible. But that's a very, very brief summary, and more than a little oversimplified.
Yeah, well, I've made a couple of videos where I've done research into the whole Moloch and Baal are Celtic deities. They've been worshipped in Scotland and Ireland since time began. We can't really find any gods before that, and that's where a lot of their names can come from, like Belfast and Balamory. And if you look all over Scotland and Ireland, you'll find Bel and Baal everywhere, because that was one of their deities. That was one of their gods. And Moloch, you find mountains called Moloch in Ireland and Scotland, and Moloch. And they try and say that Moloch was like a Mesopotamian. I think they were trying to say it was Mesopotamian or something like that. It was derived from Mesopotamia. But as far back as time goes, these are Celtic gods. These Baal and Bel, and it says pass through the fire unto Moloch and Beltane, the fire festival that used to have in Celtic Scotland and Ireland, and they still have it. They still sort of have it up there, Colton Hill, but it's all about fire, and the boys had to jump over the flames, like back in ancient times, like the young boys of the village had to jump over the flames of the fire, and they'd pass the cattle through two flames of fire to kill all the parasites on the cows, and before they sell them in the cattle markets.
That's right. Yeah.
But I'm just trying to emphasize the point that Moloch and Baal are well-established Celtic gods. They were being worshipped in Scotland now for a long time.
Celto-Hebrew, we could say.
But they're big in the Bible as well. They're big in the Bible. So
Well,
this is where
I shouldn't say Celto-Hebrew, because obviously the Old Testament is very opposed to the worship of Moloch, obviously. But what I mean is, like, the Hebrews would have been familiar with that deity, if for no other reason than Jehovah, their deity, was opposed to Moloch, if I'm reading it correctly. But yeah, I know what you mean. When Scotland was Jewish, touches on it a bit. Go ahead.
Dante's Inferno. They're fallen angels. Like Moloch sitting there, like having a flag. Baal sitting there with his beer. And they're all sitting about moping around because they've been banished.
Yep. This is why.
But that's my point, is that there's that crossover between Celtic or pagan, and then you've got the Christian, and it's that Hebrew, and it crosses over, and then it almost blurs, and it almost merges together, and it's trying to separate them, and finding who the saints were, and you dig into some of these saints, like Saint Bridget, and you find that Bridget is just an old Irish Celtic goddess, and so like, what came first, the saint or the ancient Celtic goddess? Duh.
Yeah, exactly.
So then you start realizing that all these stories about these saints doing these things, well, how can they be true if they're based on a deity that existed before them?
Well, that's exactly what I meant when I emailed you. I think it was yesterday, saying, when I go into that part of when Scotland was Jewish, I'm going to do it with you, because you love all this stuff, and they talk about this kind of thing, about remote parts of Scotland, parts of like rural Scotland, where they cling on to their pagan beliefs for ages, or very, very long time, and like the church tries to come in and crush it and stomp it out, and they fail for a long time, and the Scots cling to it.
And that's what a lot of the story is in the Bibles as well. Like it's all about the disbelievers and the people that are worshipping the old ways and the old, and that's the old Scots-Irish religion. That's the old pagan. That's the old Celtic religion. That's what the Bible's talking about. That's the religion they're on about. The heathens, should they say? And that's what they're on about. And to get the heathens on board, they couldn't just go around killing them all. They had to sort of merge the two things together.
Hybridize it.
Yeah. So that's what I mean. Is hybridized religions everywhere, and it's just trying to separate it all.
That's why I was saying you're going to love these chapters when we get into them, and you're going to get really into that stuff, because it talks about this kind of, not exactly this, but it goes along that kind of line. where they do their investigations into the rural areas in Scotland, and they go through the lists of the Chaldean and the Chaldee and the Celtic kind of priestly figures, and then you go into the surnames, and then they kind of switch over from being Chaldean, and then they suddenly become Sephardic French all of a sudden at a certain point in time, like the 14th, 15th century. I'm maybe spoiling it a bit, but that's why I'm saying, Ged, trust me, go along with me on this, because you're going to love it. You're going to get a lot out of it. But we'll move on to the next slide. So here we've got Lanarkshire, the coal industry, the land of the damned.
One more point, sorry, before we continue with that slide.
Yeah, okay.
Gogar.
Mm-hmm.
Gogar. The area beside Edinburgh Airport.
Yeah.
Gogar Road. Gogar. Flat. Totally flat.
I know.
It's like
that's exactly what I was thinking.
And you can see Arthur's Seat. It's like right in the, if you're driving along the airport road, as we usually call it when you're talking to your mates. I came along the airport road again, but it's Glasgow Road, Gogar, whatever you want to call it. But it's the road that goes along the airport, and it's totally flat. And there's a stone in there. I found it on an old map. I was like, oh, there's an old like standing stone that was called the Cat Stain. The Cat Stain. I was like, oh, I want to see that. I want to see that. So
surprised. Yep.
So I managed to find out where it was in the old map and then mark it on a modern map so I can go and visit it. And fucking, it's inside the airport. It's actually in the airport fucking grounds, like near one of the runways, kind of shit.
Dear.
It's like no way, but they didn't want to move it, sort of thing. But it's quite close. It's just on the other side of the fence. You can walk right up to the fence at Edinburgh Airport and watch the planes coming in and all that stuff, and it's so close, man. I just feel like. And in fact, it's even got writing on it. It's even got an inscription on it, and they reckon it could be like Romano-British inscription.
Hmm.
But the Gogar, it's flat. It seems to be the only area. That's probably why there's an airport there, because it's so flat, and when you drive along it, it's just Arthur's Seat you're looking at when you're driving from.
And Corstorphine Hill, but yeah.
No, really. It's just Arthur's Seat. Like that's a dominant feature when you're looking at the skyline. It's just Arthur's Seat in front of you.
Well, you can see Arthur's Seat as far away as Armadale.
Aye,
it dominates the skyline for a long time.
But that's the main thing. But so you can imagine maybe something crashing, I don't know. Maybe if it is Gogar, that's maybe where the name.
Yep. And
it's maybe inspired by the name. Maybe I'm not saying it happened there or whatever, but maybe this is where Gogar gets inspired by this.
Well, we'll get to that later on, but not unlike Hewley Hill, right, at Newbridge.
Aye.
Fairly similar. Because I was thinking of that as well.
That's right at the end of that's just right at the end of the. No, well, just before. It's just before the Glasgow Road.
Yeah, the cairn at Hewley Hill.
Yep.
Yeah, you got your McDonald's there, and you got all the factories, and you got this Bronze Age cairn, or
Clifton Hill Road or something. It's called. Is it Clifton Hill Road? I think.
I can't mind. Maybe
it's a road that runs sort of around it as well, and you can go up past there's a Tesla place and everything up
up to Ratho and places like that.
Ratho, aye.
Mm-hmm. So here's the Lanarkshire coal industry, the land of the damned. And I'm just thinking, well, if it's Lanarkshire and it's coal, then that seems to imply a lot of death, right? Because apparently the fossil fuels were made out of the remains of
here where I live. I'm right beside. I'm right beside the airport's just there, and I'm right beside the shale bings, big mounds,
the oil industry.
Mounds. And shale, it's a massive area for shale and oil deposits. What if that's the remnants of these soldiers blasted in the ground? They've fossilized. They've turned into fossil fuel. Now we're using them to fuel our paraffin lamps.
Well, the clue as always is in the name, fossil fuel, right? What's the first name there? Fossil. What the first word? Fossil, right? Well, yeah, fossil fuels.
But this area is packed with fossil fuel as well, close to the airport and. All round Edinburgh and the old Lothians, you get coal and shale.
Land of the damned, the land of the fossils leading to the fossil fuels. Yep, exactly. I think it's your turn, mate. Can you read that? Okay.
Corstorphine Hill. This valley of Hinnom or Hamon Gog, valley of slaughter, valley of the Rephaim, giants, became subsequently Golgotha, the place of Gothic skulls. The invaders being generalized as Goths in this age, which buried their tens of thousands, suddenly destroyed by the act of the Almighty in the 14th year of Hezekiah, killed in a flash by awful lightnings in the area where the skulls and bones remained a grim memory of the dramatic past, a miracle by the direct intervention of heaven, which saved the city from collapsing into their hands. If ever there were a miracle such as this celestial intervention, as believed in subsequent ages, it was there at Golgotha, the place of a skull, which is called in the Hebrew Golgotha, where they crucified him. John 19:17-8. The valley of Hinnom lies on the main road to Falkirk and reaches the Corstorphine Hill, some 2 miles from the capital. Now the middle of a golf course where, there is little doubt, stood originally Tophet, the high place, the place of sacrifice. Another 3 miles on, the road reaches Gogor Mount, Gogor Village, Gogor Burn, and other landmarks bearing the name Gogor. It retains the name Gog to this day. Gog himself was in scripture the leader of the Goths in the reign of Hezekiah. The Romans called this area Gugernum, only a variation, and had a military station hereabouts. Here, in truth, is a place of ill memory, which later became Jerusalem's dung heap. It offers little to the eye, but is redolent with memories of an immortal event in the history of man. So he kind of goes on about the Gog sort of connection.
I don't know why Beaumont's dancing around it, where he's saying where they crucified him. He's meaning the crucifixion of Jesus. I don't know why he doesn't just say it, because like if you're just skimming over it, reading it, you'd maybe miss that and it'll just kind of go over your head. Like, what does he mean? Oh, never mind. But so yeah, I mean, if you're talking about the crucifixion of the Lord Jesus Christ himself, you might want to mention that explicitly at some point. But because he does mention it in other chapters in this book and in Britain, the Key to World History. But again, I would emphasize it. Never just assume that people have read the previous chapters or the previous books. It's one of the flaws of Beaumont. He always assumes that everyone, first of all, has read everything else he said, and second of all, believes him, without properly really backing it up. Really,
there's one mistake he's kind of made in here. It's maybe, I don't know if it's a time thing or whatever, but Corstorphine Hill isn't in the middle of a golf course.
There's a golf course right beside it.
Oh no, there is a golf course. There is a golf course. It's a free one. Well, it's not a free one. It's a pub. It's like a council one. You can. There's Carricknell golf course. Wait, there's Carricknell, Corstorphine. But do you know what? It's not up that hill. It's not that. The zoo is up that hill, mate. You've not got the golf course. You've got the zoo. See, if you go up Corstorphine Hill, you end up going right to the fence of the zoo. You can, if you're wandering up the hill, you can see like the zebra and all that stuff. So if you actually climb Corstorphine Hill, which there's a tower at the top of it, there isn't a golf course around it.
Not all the way around it. It's on one side. It's not really.
No, mate. There's no golf course on Corstorphine Hill.
No, I didn't say on it. I said beside it.
But he says on it.
Yeah, the way he's worded it, it's not spectacular. He
says it's in the middle of. So she's saying that Corstorphine Hill is Hinnom.
Not quite. I do cover that a little bit later on. He's saying that the valley of Hinnom
lies on the main road to Falkirk and reaches Corstorphine Hill some 2 miles from. So what's he saying here? The valley of Hinnom lies on the main road to Falkirk, which is probably that road out there that goes to.
He's talking about Edinburgh.
Will be the A98 and the one that goes right under the railway bridge, kind of under Broxburn, because that's on your way to Falkirk from.
Yeah, the trouble is, it's not really a valley. It's flat kind of thing. But I think what he means is like if you take it from Corstorphine to Falkirk, it's kind of like goes down and then. But it's not really a valley as you think of a valley. It's flat land, completely flat land actually, like you said yourself. But maybe they were just being dramatic in the way that they described it, the Valley of Slaughter. Gugernum, a variation, a military station there, but that's not really saying much of anything. There was a temporary Roman camp that they found in the area, but
Oh, there's lots of ruins
you know.
up there, man. I'll need to. Do you know what? I might just go back up there soon, maybe summertime, and because there's lots of little sort of masonry sticking out the mud and lots of bits and bobs up there that you can sort of like nose around. The tower's pretty cool, but you know it's modern. But there's ruins sort of sticking it out and around the area that kind of look. I'm sure
Do you
there's
know
cup ring. I'm sure there's cup ring marks on some stones up there as well.
Yeah, there is. There is.
So it just shows you that the area has been inhabited for a long time.
I was going to say the tower at the top of Corstorphine Hill is dedicated to Walter Scott.
Yeah.
So there's another Walter Scott thing. I'm going to have to look into this guy, honestly. He keeps turning up. So this is exactly what we're talking about here. On the left-hand side, Tophet, the high place. There's the tower dedicated to Walter Scott at the top. And there's the painting there on the right of the crucifixion. Because just to emphasize that point, what Beaumont is referring to here, in very, glib, I guess maybe is the terms, I don't know if you want to refer to the crucifixion of the Lord, in such a very vague way. The place of a skull which is called Golgotha, where they crucified him. Crucified who? The Romans crucified loads of people. Confirm it. But anyway. And also with an immortal event in the history of mankind. Don't be flowery, be direct. Wait, what the fuck are you talking about, mate? You're talking about the crucifixion of the Lord. Okay, we'll say that.
Trees. If you got rid of the trees around the tower, it would look more prominent. That tower, because you wouldn't even know that tower's there when you're walking around Corstorphine. You wouldn't even know that's there. You have to actually go through the woodland sort of walk, and it's like a walkway you can go through up to the hill, and it's a gradual sort of thing. I mean,
do you know what's beneath Corstorphine Hill? There's a nuclear fallout shelter from the 1960s beneath that hill.
Is there?
Yeah, for all the politicians and their all family, if they happen to be in Edinburgh at the time and all that. There was talk about turning it into a museum a few years ago, but it came to nothing. But that's Edinburgh.
So what's the image on the right here? Is that the hill?
It's just a painting.
Jesus
just a painting of the crucifixion.
Right. Cool.
Yeah. Just to give you like the general idea, context.